Good morning. Thank you guys for joining. We're gonna just give it a minute or two to make sure everyone has hopped on that will be here. All right, I think I'm going to get started. There might be a few people hopping on in the next minute or two, but the first few slides are hopefully things you all already know, so they won't miss much. Hope everyone's doing well. Happy Thursday. Thanks for being here for our third of 4 trainings in 2025. Today, we're going to walk through how sort of like tips and tricks and how to assist grantees through getting to that notice to proceed. We understand that this can be a challenging phase of the award, and obviously grantees are eager to start spending their money. And so, we want to help them, get that notice to proceed in the fastest way possible so they can start doing that. So um, today it'll be me, Adrian, Casey, presenting, and we have our executive director, Sarah Waring, here. She's going to give us some federal updates, but that's the NBRC team that you have on the call today. So, like I said, we'll hear from Sarah on some federal updates. I'll give you some partnership program updates as well as talk about upcoming trainings, and then we'll jump into sort of the more or less 4-ish parts of getting that notice to proceed. And at each one of those stages, we have either a poll or we'll put you into breakout groups. And then at the end, I'm going to highlight some guidance material that we've been putting together about project kickoff meetings. And then everybody's favorite point in the agenda, GMS Corner with Casey. So get your GMS questions primed for that. We will cover some new functions, and then Casey can answer any questions. So, Sarah, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I appreciate it. And thanks for inviting me to join today. We're always interested in the formats and topics that work best for everybody. So this update format is something we're happy to try out. I'm going to speak briefly this morning about NBRC funding status and in relationship to sort of the overall uncertainty that communities and institutions are facing related to federal funding. So I think it's fair to say there's a fluid debate in Washington, D.C. about how to achieve American values through tax policy and investment policy. The debate and the resulting actions mean that sometimes as the policy is worked out, there are fits and starts to some of the programs that impact all of us and a lot of our communities. So, we've seen it happen a few times at NBRC. First in February when the OMB issued an overall funding freeze, which was later lifted. That you all saw that pause happen for us as well. There are other impacts that you all may have seen in different ways. In the late winter, a lot of probationary government employees were also released from service, later to be reinstated if possible. Similar, the AmeriCorps program funding and a lot of the volunteer positions across our region were cut in the spring, later to be reinstated. And then overall, with the passage of H.R. 1, or the One Big Beautiful Bill, it sets the tone for policy, specifically tax policy and individual payments or benefits from the federal government for quite a few areas going forward, including benefits like SNAP or food benefits. So overall, what we're seeing is really this deliberation that changes the lines between state and federal ownership and authority and support for various different program activities. Now, to turn a moment just to NBRC itself, all agencies work with the Office of Management and Budget and are expected to submit a budget that follows the administration's priorities for that agency. So sometimes the White House wants to increase the budget for specific agencies. Other times they want to de-emphasize that work or reduce the work or plan to close them out. In the first Trump administration, the NBRC was planned with the administrative budgets to be closed out every year. And that also happened to us again this year. So the president's budget was a closed down budget. Many of you are already aware of the unique structure that the Northern Border Regional Commission benefits from, that we're a state and federal partnership. We are not an executive branch agency, and instead we are legislatively created. So our funding exists in a few different appropriations bills. We've been tracking these bills really closely. So the ping pong of the budget creation goes from the White House back to Congress. And since the administration's FY26 budget was announced, we are actually really pleased to share with all of you that Congress has made it clear that they do see a continued role for NBRC and the other regional commissions in the coming year. The House Ag Appropriations Bill, marker bill, came out and had a dollar figure in there for us. The Energy and Water Bill came out and had a dollar figure in there for us. So they've proposed continuing funding. It's not quite yet at the levels we've seen in past years, but it's still a very strong sign of support for the Regional Commission and for all of its programs. So NBRC's decisions about investments are directly in line with state priorities, and each state really manages that decision-making process a little bit differently, which speaks to the individual distinctness that each state's government structure and design allows for. But we're really proud of that sort of partnership and collaboration, and we're really happy to have been able to inform our commission when we met just earlier this month that we are seeing these appropriation bills as a strong sign of support for the commission. Overall, the commission's still pretty young in federal government, but we now have enough history on the ground to really be a recognizable and hopefully an appreciated partner for rural economic and community development activities. So we did just also want to take a moment to say that while we're really grateful for the support that Congress is showing us, there was a lot of advocacy that happened this year with many organizations on the ground speaking up on behalf of the commission's work and sharing their voices with the congressional delegations from all 4 states. We believe that this type of support does make a difference and hopefully will continue to make a difference. So it's fair to say that we really think we're in the best spot that we could hope for right now in this time of sort of fluid debate, that we have no reason to doubt that our fall rounds and our calendar year 26 grants are going to go forward. The funding levels may change, but we are pleased about where we are right now in the back and forth with Congress. Obviously, there are a few options, including a continuing resolution. So nothing is certain until it's signed off on. But that's sort of my update for the morning, Sarah. And I'm happy to take a question or two if people have them.
Great, thank you. I was going to ask if you were able to take questions. Are there any questions for Sarah? Feel free to just come off your mic or put in the chat or raise your hand. Sarah, are you hanging on or do you need to hop off?
No, I can hang on for a bit. I'm excited to see the.
Great.
Yeah, so put them in the chat if you want, and I'll try to answer them. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. All right. We are gonna keep it moving then. Okay. Just some general updates with the partnership program. 2 out of 3 of these you have already been notified about, but I just want to highlight them again. A reminder that starting in 2025, the LDD fee has been updated or changed. So basically for project awards, oh, this thing is going on its own here. Basically for project awards of 400,000 or less, your fee is a flat 8,000. And then anything above 400,000 is based off that 2% formula that you are very familiar with. And then secondly, the reminder about how you now have a choice between 2 different payment structures. One is what you've been doing, invoicing the grantee for hours of work performed, or you can do a quarterly advancement. And there's more detail in our resources about that. And then lastly, which Casey, this is the new update, and Casey will go over this in his section, but as LDDs, you are now able to upload files to specific records in the GMS for your grantees. And so there's guidance on this in the LDD GMS support toolkit. And then, like I said, Casey's going to go over this in a little more detail. So if you have any questions about that, we can save it for Casey at the end. I just wanted to highlight some resources for you to bookmark. Again, you know, these slides will go out so you can have all these links once the slides are sent out. But bookmarking the LinkedIn network, the resource library is really where, as you know, we put a ton of the resources that we put together for you. Obviously, our grant administration page, which has all the forms, and then last but not least, that grant management system. I need to figure out how to keep this from moving forward. Our December training, or our December, it says December, it should say November. Our Q4 training will be November 12th, 2025. I will send out a reminder with the slides and the recording of this, but please mark your calendars. And we are going to do a little reflection on 2025, as well as looking at some changes for 2026. And more details will sort of come out in the coming months as far as details of that. I put together a survey about getting your feedback on when hosting our trainings would be best for you. We realize we all have very packed calendars and we're all working with multiple competing deadlines. And so I'm hoping that with your feedback through this form, we'll be able to kind of plan when those, when we host our quarterly trainings that can really best fit most people's schedules. I'm not going to promise we're going to fit everybody's schedule, but it will be really helpful to understand like what works best for you. So I put the form link in the chat. Again, this will go out in an email. So if you don't get to it, it's fine. But just wanted to notify you that, you know, we really want your feedback on scheduling those trainings for 2026. Okay, before we jump into the bulk of the training, I just wanted to give 2 friendly reminders about some guidance documents that are available. These are topics that come up frequently with LDDs and or grantees, and so I just wanted to really highlight them here, that we have specific guidance documents that talk about these 2 topics. As a reminder, you can start charging time as soon as the date of obligation. There's a guidance document for this. That block with an arrow is a link. It's in the LDD resource library. And grantees and LDDs, you will get a message via the collab tab in the grant record of the GMS with that obligation date, which also is something that's sent to your email. So you should be receiving notification of the actual obligation date of the grants of the projects that you are administering. So that's reminder number 1. Reminder number 2, please make sure that your grantee, if you have a grantee that is within the GMS system, please make sure they request a review from you in the GMS. We've gotten a lot of questions about this. you're not going to see sort of anything once you log into the GMS. You're not going to really see anything on your page unless a review has been requested. Tim?
Yeah, I was just curious because this has happened to me before. Like,
Sure.
how do I know that I have? You know what I mean? If I don't see them, how
Yeah.
do I know?
How do you know if you
That there's a
are
grantee coming, like that they're expected, you know, like they,
sure?
you know, that they're expecting me to review it, but they haven't put it on there, you know, haven't indicated that I'm their LDD or anything like that.
Sure.
So
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
you know, I
yeah.
might get a surprise. Yeah.
Well, hopefully you won't get a surprise. But I totally understand what you mean. So, something we started doing last year, 2 years ago, maybe, is after our pre-application round has been closed, we send out a list to all the LDDs that include the projects, includes obviously contact for that, et cetera, that type of information, and then which LDD they've associated with their project in the GMS. So theoretically, you should know pretty early on if a grantee has sort of like chosen you as their LDD. Sometimes they don't make that association in the GMS at that stage. They're not required to at that point, but that's sort of like the first step. And then, you will know, um, maybe Casey or Adrian, you can chime in for this, but once sort of grant agreements are being put together, can you remind me where the LD, like what sort of notification an LDD would get if they are associated with that project?
I'm happy to jump on this. So if an LDD has been associated onto those project contacts, we are keeping track of all of that. And as soon as we get confirmation from our financial services provider that the funds are in place, we do send an email to the authorized official, and we CC the LDD. We CC anyone who's on that project contacts. So if you're listed in there, you'll get that email. And that's sort of an initial sort of reference you can use in terms of understanding when folks have been associating you onto those active awards.
Thank you. And this guidance document, Tim, sort of talks about like at which phase a grantee can request a review of a thing, because there's certain phases in which kind of the records are frozen, like while I think grant agreements are being put together. And so that guidance document kind of walks through, at what point once right, you're working with that grantee, how can you best direct them to make a review request? Because once that action is taken, that sort of is there's sort of a waterfall effect. You're then able to see a bunch of other records because they've requested that review. And that's like that switch that needs to be flipped in order for you. They're not just going to show up on your page. It is sort of an active action that the grantee needs to take in order for you to start seeing some of the stuff they're seeing, if that makes sense.
No, that makes total sense. Thanks for the
Okay.
explanation.
Yeah.
I think that's usually where it is I have to get the grantee to flip that switch. So
Yep.
that
Yep.
makes sense. So
Cool.
yep.
And
All right,
and
thank you.
yeah, you're welcome. And we put together a one pager specifically for our LDDs to send to the grantees. Like if you're having trouble getting them to make that initial review request, we've put a guidance document that you guys can use to send to your grantees that say, here are literally the 5 steps, follow this to the T, and hopefully that should, get you into their record. So that is also in that LDD resource library. And happy to answer any questions in more detail on that later. Okay, let's get into it. All right, so we're going to start discussing partial notice to proceed. So many of you, I think, are very aware of a PNTP, and this is you know, considering projects that might need to spend some money prior to getting that full notice to proceed. And so costs listed here, costs that can be included in a partial notice to proceed are the grant administration costs for you all, and that can be up to 50% of your budgeted LDD fee. And that would require having an executed LDD contract in order for you to start getting for that PNTP to be approved. NEPA costs, you know, as we know, a lot of projects might need to get NEPA approval. That could take some extra time and extra costs, and so that can be included in a partial notice to proceed, as well as accruing match and cost share. And we've sort of identified that the ideal time for a project to ask for that partial notice to proceed would be after that initial NEPA determination. And we'll get a little bit more into NEPA next. But once sort of the project knows, is it a CADEX or is it something else? That's when you might be like, okay, here's our decision matrix of like, you know, PNTP or just go for that full notice to proceed. To request a PNTP, this is the form that you all or that the grantee needs to use, and ideally, you know, you all are able to help them put this together. This is on our grant administration page. I've linked it here, and we can answer sort of any questions you might have about getting this form put together. And lastly, we put together sort of this decision tree for partial notice to proceed. It is a standalone document on in the LD resource library, so if you want to download that. But this kind of outlines the three different sort of scenarios, if you will. You know, in the first box, you know, does the project have a completed CADEX determination? If that's a yes, then start looking into match source review. When you're doing that, are there any other unsecured match sources? If not, then start working towards that full notice to proceed. If there are unsecured match sources, then yes, you should probably suggest to the grantee to get that partial notice to proceed for potential, you know, LDD costs in helping them secure that match. In that second box, you know, does the project require additional consultations to satisfy the CADEX? If yes, you know, find out from MBRC what are those required tasks. If there's going to be, you know, if the project needs more time, then you should probably look into helping that grantee get a partial notice to proceed. If not, start working towards the documentation for that full NTP. And then lastly, probably the most time consuming and probably, I mean, Adrian, correct me if I'm wrong, but probably the situations in which we see the most partial notice to proceed is if a project is requiring an environmental assessment. And as you all know, that tends to take a little more time. And so I would say a lot of our projects that have this determination do often use a partial notice to proceed to help cover some of those NEPA costs. Adrian, do you have anything to add to that before we jump to the poll?
I'll just say that that was really, it's meant to be, you know, a suggestion of when to check in if a partial notice to proceed would be beneficial to a project. They all go through that NEPA review process. And so it's sort of a natural opportunity to check in if a PNTP would be helpful to that grantee at that time of that determination.
Great, thank you. And like I said, we made this a standalone document. So if this is something that you want to sort of save to your desktop or save to your MBRC folder to help, you know, guide you in those situations, you can download that in the resource library. All right, I've got a poll for you guys. Let's see if I can launch it successfully. We'd love to know how many of your grantees have used a partial notice to proceed. You know, I think this is something curious to know if you feel like a lot of your grantees are using it, or if, you know, a majority of your grantees are just going straight for the notice to proceed. This will just sort of help us in, you know, thinking about how we can better support the LDDs and the grantees in this phase. Are you all able to see the responses, or do I have to?
I think you'll have to share.
Okay, let's see. Oh, we can see the responses in the chat. Thanks, Victoria. All right, looks like 0 to 2, I would say, is probably the most common. Awesome. Okay, interesting. Thank you. Are there any questions about the partial notice to proceed phase before we move on to our NEPA approval? All right. Adrian, go for it.
Great. Well, we've gone over a few, you know, high level NEPA related terms and already, but we thought, again, this would be a good opportunity to dig in a little more about sort of the NEPA approval process and how it's important to the notice to proceed. As you all already know, MBRC investments require the NEPA review, and that NEPA approval is required for a notice to proceed. So high level MBRC coordinates that NEPA review analysis and guidance with our environmental consultant, the Clark Group. The grantee generally hears from MBRC or a representative from the Clark Group about the NEPA requirements for their project. Those requirements or that NEPA determination falls into one of 3 categories. If it's a categorical exclusion or a CADX, the grantee will receive a notification essentially at the beginning of their project that the CADX documentation has been approved and NEPA has been satisfied for their project. So if a categorical exclusion applies, that project essentially has satisfied that requirement early on in their sort of project life cycle. If the Clark Group determines that, yes, a categorical exclusion applies, but there's also some additional consultations with a resource agency that are required to kind of confirm no impact, the grantees will receive additional guidance on those consultation requirements. And then third, if the Clark Group determines an environmental assessment is required, the grantee will receive guidance sort of on the next steps in that process. And as Sarah mentioned earlier, you know, one of the reasons we're talking about NEPA is to help understand when those costs may be needed as part of a partial notice to proceed. And a grantee, you know, may need your support in accessing those funds. There's also the possibility that the grantee did not include those costs in their initial budget documentation. We certainly try to have those costs included in the budget documentation from the get-go, but it's possible that they didn't budget enough or they didn't budget at all. And so in those cases, they will also need to submit an amendment for a budget redirection so that they can adjust those costs in their budget to account for NEPA requirements. And that's another place where LDDs may be needed. To help sort of further, you know, illuminate the different roles in the NEPA process, we kind of made some suggestions about, you know, when the LDD is really involved in the NEPA process, when the grant, what is expected of the grantee, and what MBRC and the Clark Group are, have committed to do. So we want to really make sure everyone understands how it works and how we all are working together to kind of get to that NEPA approval point in the process. For the LDDs, certainly, again, looking for assistance with any partial notice to proceed that may be needed for NEPA costs, any budget redirection that may be needed for that PNTP. There's also the option, I think many of you on the line today have been through a NEPA process with MBRC and a grantee in the past, and some of you may have some special expertise related to that NEPA process. And so there's always an option to discuss with your grantee an additional contract for LDD, with you as the LDD for NEPA consulting. And so if that's something your LDD is positioned to support, we certainly encourage you to have that conversation with the grantee. NEPA consultation is not part of that standard contract, and so it would be a separate contract with the grantee to cover specific NEPA related tasks. The grantee, they're expected to sort of kickstart the NEPA review process during the application and submit a complete and accurate NEPA intake form. They're also responsible for tracking the communications around NEPA with MBRC and the Clark Group. They're responsible for working with the LDD to request a partial notice to proceed for those costs. And finally, they're responsible for securing any additional consultant support that they might need to meet the NEPA requirements. MBRC and the Clark Group were really responsible for making that initial determination, communication with the grantees, tracking the overall NEPA process to ensure that it meets our requirements. And in the end, MBRC is responsible for providing that signed NEPA approval documentation and communicating with the grantee when that NEPA approval has, been signed off on. So I guess before we leave this slide, I'll pause for questions, and then I think Sarah has an activity lined up.
Adrian, there are a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
Kate says, one of our grantees wants to use other funds for NEPA review. Assume that this is fine.
Yeah. So meaning they don't want to have it as part of the MBRC budget. They can go outside of the budget. Yes, they can go outside of the MBRC budget.
Great. Sarah?
Yeah, sorry. This might be a question related to, I think, the second one also, the multi-agency, when there's funding from multi-agencies, and I know Andrea's on the line too, so she may be able to give better guidance. Different agencies do NEPA at different times in the obligation process. So like my last agency, USDA-RD, would not issue an obligation or the partial notice to proceeds or anything like that until after the NEPA review was complete, and NBRC does it a different way. So it is beneficial if a grantee has multiple federal agency funding in their capital stack to figure out from each grant agreement where NEPA falls in that obligation process or in that obligation timeline. And maybe Adrian or Andrea can speak more to that, because I think that may also be what Blair is sort of asking in that second question.
Yeah, essentially MBRC is saying, we've approved this project, but it's a conditional approval, a conditional grant agreement that, we're not going to commit any irretrievable funds, I think is the language that we use, or make irretrievable commitments until the NEPA has been satisfied. So we issue a conditional grant agreement until this NEPA condition has been satisfied. And you're right, not all agencies are the same. And what is a Cat X for one agency may not be a Cat X for NBRC. Although we do, one commitment NBRC makes is that if there are other federal funders involved that have either completed a NEPA process for the same project or have are in the process of working on NEPA for the same project, we commit to working with them as much as we can. So again, sometimes it's that scope of the project might not be exactly the same for both funders. So we need to confirm that the scope that they've approved or are working on is the same for the NBRC project. So we do commit to really, I mean, no one wants to do it twice. So if we can make use of what has already been done, that is definitely a priority for NBRC, but we have to also confirm that it's meeting our requirements. Is
Great.
there, yeah. Okay.
Blair, did that answer your question, or did you have any clarifications? Maybe we can hear from Blair in the chat. And then Casey, I don't know if you want to elaborate on Thomas's question. I saw you give him a thumbs up, but
Will be easier. I've got my little, typing out a whole little novel here, but probably easier just to say it. So was just gonna say that and Andrea, I know she's on the call. She can feel free to jump in if I'm missing any piece here. But essentially, for projects that require minimal review, so those kind of CADX projects, those may be in place and on the grant record in the GMS. The sort of documentation of that review being finalized might be in place by the time you even get notification that the funds are in place. Andrea's been doing a great job working with our environmental partners to be really proactive this round on getting those easy ones knocked out. For projects that require a little bit more review in depth, that timeline is much more variable. There are just a lot of different pieces that can go into it. And so I hesitate to give you a sort of a firmer expectation around that, but you can always check in with us. A member of our team can take a look at where it's at and give you an update. In any case, that finalized documentation will eventually end up on the grant record in the GMS for that project. So that's where you can look to check and see whether that's been complete or not. And let me know if I missed anything.
thanks, Casey. And I wanted to note, I also created this slide as a standalone document. It lives in the LDD resource library. So again, if that's something that you want to download onto your computer to save and reference at any point, please feel free to do that. And Thomas is asking, can I see the grant record or only the grantee?
Yes, you can see the grant record as soon as they request the first review from you. So once we get that grant agreement finalized, that's why we stress that they, just ask for you to look at a progress report, because just that first connection is what will then allow you to see kind of all of the project details in that grant record in the system. And like the uploaded files and things like that.
Okay, we're gonna do another poll. We would really like to understand if your LDD has been contracted for NEPA assistance in the past. Adrian had mentioned on that role slide that something that a role that LDDs can play is helping with the NEPA, but through a separate contract. And so, yeah, would love to know if your grantee, if your LDD has done that assistance. It's like the poll is maybe not working for some people. go ahead and just put yes or no in the chat. If it's not working for you. Okay, it looks like most people have not, most LDDs have not been contracted separately for NEPA. Well, we were going to do breakout groups so you guys could share your experiences. But based on this, maybe we won't do that. Not to put Thomas on the spot, but curious if you have any comments on your experience playing that role as the LDD, but contracted separately to do NEPA. You could also say no, and we can move on, but just would love to hear your experience if you're willing to share.
Does my mic work or no?
Yep, we can hear you.
So I actually, the individual that did it couldn't make the training today, so I wasn't me particularly. I just know our organization has done it. We're doing it now for some of our own reviews, and I mean, it's all right. The process as a whole, like the NEPA process as a whole, I think can be a heavy lift depending on what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. All right.
But as far as I think the biggest thing I struggle with is educating the grantees themselves, because a lot of them, because even I noticed in like our region, some of the engineering consultants don't fully understand the NEPA, and you know, bringing them up to speed is the hardest part.
Mm-hmm. All right, I appreciate hearing that experience. And if, you know, anything comes to mind, Thomas, for you, your organization, that NBRC could help, you know, with clarifying things or making it more clear, or, you know, any kind of educational material that could be helpful. We'd love to hear the suggestion, and we could see what we can do. Are there any other NEPA questions before we move on?
If I could just throw one out there. Hi,
Please.
So can you give a little bit of information about, you know, if you need someone, if they need to hire a professional to do a NEPA review, what is the limit? What's the cutoff where they have to go out to RFP as opposed to just calling the local person who does this kind of thing to say, can you come do this for us?
Great question. Adrienne or Andrea?
Sure. Well, all essentially there's one big difference. The LDD sort of does not require that competitive, that open and competitive RFP sort of process. So if the LDD has that experience, they have the option to go with you without, you know, soliciting other quotes. If they go outside of the LDD, you know, we expect that they follow typical procurement requirements for MBRC and matching funds. So there's, you know, it depending on the size of the work of the contract, there's different types of procurement that would be associated with that work. So again, we would refer back to that grant administration compliance manual to look at how that contracted work would fit within the procurement, the different procurement processes for different amounts.
Thank you.
Hopefully that answers, yeah.
Thanks, Jen. Any other NEPA questions? Hearing none. All right. Next, Adrienne's gonna talk about securing match and cost share.
Great. Okay, so we're focused on the NTP. Another requirement for the notice to proceed is that a grantee can document committed match and cost share for their project. So grantees, they should be aware that they are expected to be able to secure the match within the first 12 months of their grant agreement. And to do that, NBRC uses the NBRC Form 1002. This is the way that we verify committed match for the project. And we're going to walk through that form, so I won't go into all the details on this slide now. But essentially, the grantee will need to complete this form to outline the committed match for their project. They'll also need to append the documentation for that form, for that match commitment, to the form. So there's two pieces. There's the form and then there's the documentation. We ask that it all comes in as a single document so that they're together and we don't lose track of the different pieces of match commitment. I'm sure some of you have seen some rather lengthy match commitment or sources of commitment, sources of funds lists. That stack can be long and complex. And so we really ask that it's all together in one place so that we don't miss something or lose something along the way. And one point I wanted to make is that match does not have to be in hand, but it does have to be committed. So we get a lot of questions about what do we mean by match commitment, and it means that everyone involved has made a commitment that those funds will be available. So whether it's an award letter from another grant program or a commitment letter from an applicant's authorized official that they will be using their own funds to support this project, or a commitment letter from another organization. Those are the types of documentation we're looking for. Is not necessarily that you have a bank account with all of the funding in that bank account. We're happy to look at that, but we really want to see that the funds are committed. They don't have to be in hand or, fluid at that moment. Okay, so I'm going to share the Form 1002 with you all and kind of walk through that form. We have created an example form with some annotations of what to pay special attention to. NBRC really is looking for some pretty specific things in this form. And when either the amounts don't match or there isn't a signature or a corresponding documentation, we'll have to return it to the grantee for those edits. And so working with you all as the LDDs and providing as much information as we can on our resources webpage, we're definitely hoping we can reduce the number of revisions on this form. So I'll walk through a few of the sections of the form and point out, exactly what NBRC is looking for. This may be repetitive for some of you, so I apologize for that, but just thought we'd all get on the same baseline. The first section is outlined in blue, and this is reflective of the information that should be in a grant agreement. So the grantee name should be here exactly as shown as on the grant agreement. The NBRC grant award number can be found in that grant agreement. And then also the award amount from NBRC, as well as the match and cost share amount. So we at NBRC, we will compare this information to that grant agreement to make sure it's all in line. We'll also be looking, I know I'm skipping down to the bottom of the form, but we'll also be looking to make sure that the authorized official is the same on this form as it is on the grant agreement. Next, that sort of section outlined in gold or orange color is related to the sources of the match and cost share. So you'll be able to enter all of the specific sources of funds to that are contributing to the match and cost share amount total. You will not list the MBRC award amount here or the award here. That's a common issue that we see, is that grantees will submit this form with the MBRC award as a source. So we're looking for everything but the MBRC sources here. And then in the green section, that's the amount associated from that source that is committed to this project. Sometimes we'll see amounts larger than are actually committed to this project. So maybe you have, maybe a grantee has a loan for a larger amount than they're actually planning to commit to the project, but they'll put the full loan value in as an amount. So here we're really looking for the amounts that are being, that are the exact amounts that are associated with satisfying this project match commitment. The yellow section, this is telling us the type of commitment documentation that you are able to provide for that source. And we'll talk a little bit about what those are. But essentially, we're looking for a very, short summary. Is it an award letter? Is it a letter of commitment? Is it another documentation of that commitment for that source? So a short summary of what we should be looking for as the attached documentation. And again, then the authorized signature, the authorized official signature. So that's the form itself. I also wanted to provide sort of an example of a commitment letter. Oh, I should have said too, maybe I could say it next, but I'll say it now while I'm thinking of it. The Grant Administration Compliance Manual has detailed information about commitment documentation and the specific requirements in that manual. So we're going to walk through this commitment letter example, but for all types of commitment, there are some sort of specifics, and those are outlined in the manual. So this is an example of a letter that you might, that a grantee might submit from either their own organization or that another organization might submit as commitment. And some of the key features we're looking for here, again, that it's signed by the authorized official for that organization, that it's on letterhead from that organization, that the amounts committed exactly match what is on that form. So again, sort of that green number, or the green outlines on this form correspond with the green outlines or on this letter correspond with the green outlines on the form. Thank you, Sarah. So we're really looking for those exact amounts. If the amounts on the letter don't reflect what's in the form, either the letter will need to be revised or the form will need to be revised for whichever is correct. And then also in the blue, we're looking for, again, things that are sort of associated with the grant agreement. We're looking for that period of performance. So we're saying we want to see that the organization has committed to these funds during that period of performance. And we're also looking for them to, specifically say that this is for the MBRC award. So those are just some sort of key elements that MBRC is looking for when we're reviewing the documentation for match commitment. And hopefully we can help our grantees reduce the number of times we go back and forth looking for specifics in these forms and commitment documentation.
Thank you, Adrienne.
Sure.
Any questions for Adrienne, maybe specifically about that form or specific documentation types before we jump into our breakout rooms? Okay, there will be time after, so if something comes up. So we've heard from LDDs that helping a grantee secure those matching funds tends to be kind of a sticking point. And so when you registered for this training, I had asked in the registration form if you had some kind of resource, whether it's a checklist, a template, some kind of approach that you use with your grantees to help them in securing their match sources and braiding those funding streams together. So we're going to put you into some breakout rooms, and I want you all to sort of, discuss those resources. If there aren't any resources that your group comes up with or that they have on hand, discussing any kind of challenges or, I think just sharing your experience with each other about what it's like to help the grantees in securing their match sources. So I'm going to create the rooms, and you're going to be put automatically into a room. There's going to be 3 to 4 people in each room, and I'll give you guys about 10 minutes to discuss. And then when we get back, if there are resources that have been shared, we'd love to hear about them, or we'd love to just hear a report out of any challenges or any sort of questions that bubble to the top for you all that maybe we can answer. So I'm going to create rooms. I'm hoping it will put you in there. Oh, it's so nice to see your faces. Is that everyone? I think so. All right. All right. Hopefully that was enough time to discuss. We'd love to hear from you about what you all talked about. So feel free to unmute, raise your hand. Anyone like to go first?
I can speak out for our group.
Please.
So one of the challenges we discussed with match cost and shares, it's typically a lot easier when the grantee is using their own funds to meet their match. But some of the difficulties we run into is when they want to use another, say, state grant as their match cost share, getting the award documentation, everything together to line up with their regular schedule so that they can get their notice to proceed has been more challenging when they're trying to do it through that route.
Mm-hmm. Has other LDDs experienced that when there's other state or federal grants trying to get everything lined up time-wise? Anyone else would like to share what they talked about?
We just had a general observation that no project ever really is the same as any other project. And so it is a bit of a figure it out on the fly every time. It depends on, what the project is, who they are, where they're located. The funding stack looks vastly different every time.
Yeah. Are there resources that you use, Andrew, that help you in making them feel a little less unique, or is it just sort of you just take it as it comes?
I think we try to keep a catalog of available resources for every kind of project, and so we can at least say, here are, if this is historic preservation, here's a list of funders for that. If it's infrastructure, here's some. But things are coming and going all the time, so a lot of times it is kind of a new research project every time.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Who else?
Well, I'll jump in. With our group, there actually didn't seem to be too much of a problem as far as the making sure that the form was set, but there also was not a lot of experience in this realm yet within the group. So that could be part of the reason for that. We do have one though that the organization received a grant from a local savings bank as part of their community investment. I don't remember which program it fell under, for community award anyway. So she received an email saying, "Oh, come to this award ceremony." Came to the award ceremony, was told, "Here you go, you got $10,000." So the email saying come to the award ceremony was not considered to be enough to approve match. So she's working on getting an actual letter instead from the bank saying you received this grant so that she can say this is what we got.
Oh, interesting. Thanks, Jen.
I'd love it if somebody just offered me $10,000 without any kind of strings too, but
Yeah. Sounds good. Who else? Adrian, as the Catalyst program manager, I'm wondering if you have any specific questions for the LDDs, not to put you on the spot, but is there anything you would want to know from them on their experience with helping the grantees?
Well, I guess we're always looking for suggestions on how to make our requirements or, what satisfies the match commitment documentation for us more clear to everybody. So if, it's good to hear your stories about, for example, this email not necessarily satisfying our requirement, it was great news, but didn't satisfy our requirement. So I guess if there are just, observations or suggestions for us, as you especially continue to work with grantees, don't hesitate to share them with us. We do want to make it easier. We can't necessarily remove the requirements, but we do want to make it easier.
Can I just jump in? This is Steve Smith. I was in a group of just two people, but we didn't really have a problem with the cost share. I was just wondering, we neither one of us had a template or a checklist. Did anyone actually have a checklist or a template that they could share? I wasn't sure if anybody had one.
Yeah, great question. Did anyone bring a resource, any kind of template or checklist that they use to help? I mean, Andrew mentioned how different each project is. So, if there is a template or a checklist out there that could, at least help steer the conversation, yeah, that would be great if you could share. Does anyone have one? Sounds like maybe not.
Okay.
Maybe that's something we should look into creating.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. Anyone else before we move on to the next section? All right, we're gonna move on, but feel free to put anything in the chat. All right, Adrian.
Okay. I mean, this slide is really meant to be like whew, we made it to the notice to proceed. No, but really just kind of highlighting a lot of what we've already talked about today. But that these are sort of the pieces that need to be in place in order to receive that notice to proceed. And as soon as NBRC has each of these pieces, that becomes the date for the notice to proceed. So sometimes it may take NBRC, a few business days or maybe even a couple weeks to actually issue a notice to proceed. We do try to do that as quickly as we can, but that date will always be the date for which we have all of these things in place. We usually present them in this order, but there really is no order to completing the requirements for the notice to proceed. So we certainly, there are cases again where that NEPA approval is in place from the beginning, and then really where the grantee is focused on that match commitment piece to finalize the notice to proceed. But yeah, these are the requirements for the notice to proceed. Hopefully what we've shared in the last few slides and our time together has been helpful to kind of dig into that partial notice to proceed, the match commitment form and documentation, and the NEPA approval.
Can I launch the poll?
Yeah, sure.
We're just curious how many grantees you all are currently assisting getting that notice to proceed. Again, estimates, obviously, but if you do know the exact number, that's great too. While you all are answering that, we can move on to.
So sometimes, and you may all have, some of you may have been involved with a project that has already needing an amendment before the notice to proceed has been secured. Sometimes we get an amendment before the grant agreement is even complete. But so, here, the general sort of thought is that any sort of amendment in progress should be completed before the notice to proceed is issued, because of things like the match documentation might change if there's a budget redirection, or the scope might be sort of changing as a result of, some outside forces. And so before that notice to proceed is issued, we want to see any amendment in progress completed as well. Some of the things that may happen as part of that amendment process is, again, that match may change. The NEPA may no longer apply, so we sort of need to do a confirmation that the previous NEPA approval applies to whatever change in scope may be part of that amendment process. So again, sort of between that grant agreement and that notice to proceed phase, if there are amendments, it's sort of our policy and requirement that those amendments be complete before issuing that notice to proceed. Of course, amendments can come after the notice to proceed too, but this is really more related to any sort of hangups that might cause a change in the notice to proceed date.
Are there any questions for Adrian about specifically this notice to proceed, approval, getting all the documents needed in? Any sort of questions around, if amendments are needed before that notice to proceed is issued? Okay. We're going to jump into one more round of breakout rooms. We want you to discuss together around some of the challenges that you run into with your grantees in collecting these documents. Again, these are those 4 documents right here in the red, orange, green, and purple. I'm going to put you in groups of 3. Ideally, this is, one person will sort of share the challenge, one person will ask, questions, and then the other one will observe and reflect, and you can kind of cycle through those. And I will put those in the chat for you all in the rooms. Let me see if I can do this. All right, let's make sure people are back in here. All right. Hopefully that was enough time Happy to, in future trainings, if I'm not giving you enough time, please let me know. Happy to extend those breakout rooms. Does anyone want to share what y'all were talking about? Kind of challenges you were
Sure.
running into?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll go.
Thanks.
So for us, what we had kind of determined is that we work with a lot of small groups. We work with a lot of nonprofits and things like that. And a lot of our grantees are just volunteers.
Yeah.
And they are, a lot of mine at least, are elderly. And so it's a wide variety of skill levels. As to how well they can move through GMS, how well they can process paperwork, things like that. So that the skill level of the grantee is runs a huge gamut. And then small groups also mean like when you lose a critical person from the grantee, that all that expertise just goes away. And so, you can try to make connections and try to like keep it going and stuff. But if you lose those people from that grantee, that's really tricky. And the level of engagement, some groups are very engaged and some groups are very much like, I got to hound them nonstop for claims and for reports and things like that.
Yeah.
So that varies. But just like some of my, like even trying to get together, like the notice proceed stuff, it's like hounding them a lot because it's just, one or two people. And then rural areas and internet connectivity are a big challenge. Like a lot of places, they're just on dial up still. They can't, it's hard to get on a Zoom call. They got to drive 50 miles to a library or, something like that. So that is definitely a challenge for some grantees, especially the more rural areas. So that's what we came up with.
Any solutions that you came up with or anything you've seen work well?
I think just kind of doing, really checking in and making good relationships with your grantees. Is the biggest thing that we can do is just trying, even if I can't help them, but at least I can point them in the right direction. Get them the information, but just like really like I try to have a meeting with my grantees like as soon as I find out that they won an award, and we sit down and we're just like, hey, just to get to know each other, and then just trying to build those relationships, I think is key. That's the solution I got, really.
Well, you really set me up for my next slide, but thank you. Anyone else want to talk about what was shared in their room?
Yeah, we had just sort of talked about the level of engagement with some grantees as they go through the NEPA process. So it's not something necessarily as the LDD. We're not always in the same communications with the consultant they're using to complete their EA. So we can only help as much as we get asked to help. And so that's been, in my experience, one of the slower parts is just when people go through the whole NEPA process and whatever consultant they're working with, making sure they meet NBRC's requirements or NEPA's requirements.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Well, hopefully, sitting in those breakout groups is helpful just to, discuss amongst each other. I don't know how often you all sort of connect, and, I'm always just hoping to provide that platform for you guys. So hopefully, those breakout rooms are useful. Okay, Tim, thank you so much for setting that up. Something we've been discussing internally here at NBRC is, how can we get all parties involved kind of like on the same page from the start, all understanding like what everyone's role is, and, just to, start off on a good foot so that ideally, the entire period of performance goes as smoothly as possible. And so we worked on putting together a guidance document around project kickoff meetings. And so this is something that, we're suggesting that LDDs connect with their grantees using this guidance document. And I'll bring up the guidance document in a second, but essentially it's, a starting point, especially if you don't already know your grantee from past experiences, for you to, like Tim said, like get to know each other, kind of, a meet and greet, really like understand the players, and then outlining, a lot of the stuff we just talked about, right? Talking about the obligation of funds, accessing that partial notice to proceed, talking about the notice to proceed documents. I think all that is very important, but honestly, for me, what feels like the most important part about hosting, a project kickoff meeting is really talking about the role and responsibilities that the LDDs play. I think I hear a lot from LDDs that grantees are confused about what an LDD is doing or should be doing, or, they have a different idea about what the responsibilities of an LDD is than what they actually are. And so having sort of this initial meeting at the beginning of the award of the project to really lay out those roles and responsibilities, I think could be really important. And then also like talking about how you prefer to engage. I think we all have different communication styles, but, is it email? Is it phone? Would you prefer a meeting in person? Do you want to check in once a month? Those types of things that you can really set that project up for success. And so let's see if this pops up. I hope it does. Okay, so this you'll be able to find in the LDD resource library. And essentially what it has is talking about who should be in that meeting. If as an LDD, if you feel like having someone from MBRC at those meetings would be really helpful, you can reach out to me and we can, make sure that someone, or we can try and make sure that, MBRC staff person can sit in on that meeting if it would be helpful. And then, we really outlined suggested agenda topics. And so under each one of those, we kind of, give a little more detail. I put a link to that decision tree for a partial notice to proceed, talking about the documents needed, linked here, talking about roles and responsibilities, communication. Here's this note about making sure the grantee requests a review. That's something that's really important that you could touch base on in that project kickoff meeting, so that from the get, you have access to their records. Reviewing the project's period of performance. Looking at like the due dates, discussing due dates for quarterly reports and annual reports, putting them on, each the LDD's calendar and the grantee's calendar, looking at the contract, NEPA status, and then, sharing these links with the grantee as far as resources that they can use. And then additionally, we sort of put in order of operations here, talking about like kind of in which order things should potentially ideally happen. So, the obligation date, then next year, ideally hosting that project kickoff meeting. If you feel like that's going to be beneficial, you get that LDD contract signed, looking at the partial notice to proceed documentation, getting that together if that's what's necessary. Then the notice to proceed documentation, and then moving into sort of the regular grant administration duties like reporting and reimbursement. So hopefully that will be helpful for you all. Again, you can click here when you get the slides, using that suggested agenda as sort of a jumping off point. And we highly suggest, if you are scheduling these meetings, maybe wait until after the date of obligation of funds. That way you can charge for that meeting, charge for that time that you're spending on a call with them. And yeah, hopefully this can sort of help get things off on the right foot. Tim.
That is actually the point. The pinch point where I find it the most is that they have a lot of questions.
Yes.
And I don't even have that initial authorization to charge for LDDs. So like
Yes.
what I'm trying to do, and so that becomes very challenging, especially for our organization, because I have to have billable hours for everything.
Right.
And
Right.
so like what I've been doing is trying to keep it to a minimum, like how much I can help them with, and just trying
Yeah.
my best. And then
Yeah.
and I end up, like back billing essentially an hour or two once I get that
Yeah.
authorization. But that is the pinch point. It used to be that as
Yeah.
soon as they got that notice, we could give them an LDD contract, we could get started. But now we have to wait for this other one, which is seemingly like a little bit longer in the process when the grantees have questions and things like that. And so that is really the trickiest part of it.
Yeah, there's not much we allow for charging time back to the date of obligation of funds. LDD costs are one of the very few things that we allow sort of the start of charging time. And that's really like the earliest we possibly could. Because before that, there isn't a bucket of money dedicated to that project. And so, really the obligation date is the earliest we could possibly allow. And, that didn't used to be the case. I think that was a change we made in the last 3-ish years. And so, hopefully that helps a little bit. And, maybe Tim, if there's a way for, you to direct grantees to kind of hold those questions until that date, obviously, some of those questions might need answers prior to the obligation date, but potentially saying, hey, we're gonna have a kickoff meeting after, obligation of funds, if you can kind of like hold those questions until then, if they're not urgent, might give them kind of a place to put those questions. So hopefully this is a helpful document for you. You can download it off that resource library. Chris is asking, can a grantee submit a budget amendment for LDD line if all the funds won't be spent by the end of the grant? Yeah, so typically towards the end of the project, when you're close to closeout, if it becomes clear that, the LDD fee won't be spent in its entirety, towards the LDD, a budget amendment can be made to move those funds to a different line item. And Adrian, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, if that answers it.
Yeah, no, I think as long as you all agree there are sort of no more LDD requirements, then they could be redirected.
Yeah. And keep in mind too, part of that grant agreement contract is helping them with closeout material. So, if there's maybe a huge chunk of money and you're like, we're not going to bill you for that amount of money, maybe they can save, I don't know, $500 or something of that line item and then move the rest to something else. But yeah, just do, if you are going to be helping them with closeout documents, make sure that they save some of that money for you instead of moving it all to a different line. Cool. All right, now our favorite time of the day. Casey.
Good morning and hello, everybody. Thanks for bringing all this wonderful energy, great questions early in the morning here. So I will try to keep it blissfully brief here at the end and turn it over for questions. But did just want to go over a few bullet points here. So I'm going to look at this transmitting documentation piece. So while we are getting the funds in place, getting grant agreements out, if you already know that you're working with someone, you've been talking with them through the application process, you understand there's like an award on the way. while we are doing some of our administrative steps on the back end, just having an awareness for, and while we're doing, the NEPA review and that sort of thing, having an awareness of, some preparation for the LDD contract and match ready, so that once that grant agreement is activated, it can be uploaded. That will speed us along in terms of getting those processed. We ask that those records in the system, the files section for the various records in the GMS can get pretty filled up. So we ask that only finalized documentation be uploaded there. You now have the ability to upload documentation to the records you have access to. If folks had tried before, you may have run into not being able to, but now you can. If you have draft documentation that needs signatures, you're kind of going back and forth on it with folks, we suggest using the collab tab feature in the system to attach those draft documentation and send back and forth for review and edits. That will keep the record of the discussion and all of that on file, but we'll keep the sort of actual finalized documentation nice and neat for the folks down the line who are helping to process reimbursements and work with other elements of the project. Uploading documents as one PDF, also very helpful for us, and also for the sake of keeping that file section manageable. Given the comments about one of the pain points being the grantees not submitting requests for review so that you have access to their file, I figured I would go ahead and do a little live walkthrough of what it looks like from the grantee's perspective to request a review, either as a refresher for folks who aren't as familiar, either as a refresher or if you're seeing it for the first time. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so this is our test environment. So this is sort of a dummy grantee in here, but this is more or less what it looks like when they first log into their account. So especially for the folks who are getting grant agreements signed now, the first thing that we're asking them to do is to take these following steps here. So they're going to want to go to, gosh, there's a couple of ways they can get there, but probably the easiest way is to go to their grants. They'll have a list of their active grants. It'll probably just be one. There's this AD link. This is sort of the award underneath the grant, and this is where they can find their progress reporting. They'll have it as soon as the grant agreement is signed, they'll have a draft to work from. So they're on their award. Under this performance tab is their list of progress reports. So they can see what they've submitted, what's created. I'm going to go into an individual one of these reports. And there are, just as a reminder, step-by-step guides for this, but sometimes I know it's helpful to see the button pathways and see it in action. So on their progress report record, or if they, for reimbursements, for amendments, it's the same. Once you're on any of those, this is the same setup to for them to be able to request your support. So they go to this LDD tab, the LDD support tab, click this new button. They'll search for a name. Let's see. These are all real people. Okay, so I'm gonna take on Michelle. Pick a due date. apologies, Michelle, if you actually get a notification here, you can ignore it. I
No
don't know that you
worries.
will with this test environment, but just so that we can see how this looks here. So they're entering that information. They can put as much description as they want and hit save. So the thing I want to point out here is they entered the information and they clicked save, and that looks like they may be done. But no, there's more. They want us, the final step in order to actually make sure that it gets sent to you is that they're pressing this little arrow icon. And what that will do is it will send it. And then my page should refresh here. And you'll notice that the status has gone from created to sent for review. So if you're working with folks and they're like, I think I sent it to you, that's a sort of a quick troubleshooting step, is to ask them what the status is on that review, to make sure they've sent it. Also, we on our end can see the status of those reviews as well. And so we can help to troubleshoot that. So from there, your view will look a little bit different, but on the left-hand side in your view, when you log into the system, you'll have, on the left-hand side, you'll have like application reviews, reimbursement reviews, amendments, progress reports. So you'll just navigate through that sidebar to show the list of it will show you all of those items for which you've been requested review. So whether you've completed the review or it's just a draft, they'll all show up there, and you can navigate to the project information from the links in those records. So I wanted to just kind of do a little refresh on that. We're kind of continuing to build our own guidance out to folks and our directions in terms of helping them be proactive about requesting support from you. So happy to take any questions on that, or we can hop back onto that slide, Sarah.
Looks like Allison has a question. I'm assuming it's in relation to when a project is in sort of the grant agreement phase, but the LDD contact needs to be changed.
That's a great question. So there is a sort of an awkward period between when the grantees have gotten their award and they're finalizing their negotiations to make edits to their application. They can add the LDD to the application during that phase. And then there's a period between once those edits have all been submitted to us and then once the actual grant award is active. Once the grant award is active, then amendments can be processed as normal through all of our technical guides. But in that middle space, that is something that MBRC staff will have to be able, we can assist with in terms of editing the what LDD is associated with the project. So it is a little bit dependent on where the project you're referring to is at, and as far as how I might direct whether you to talk to the grantee to submit an amendment or reach out to us to get support. But if you want to just shoot an email to us to admin at with the grantee name or project number, if you have it, we'll be able to handle those requests on a case-by-case basis.
Thanks, Casey. I do want to be mindful of people's time. It is 10:57. I will not go over. And so, well, unless you have questions, then we're happy to stay on, but we will not keep you longer than you need to be here. But yeah, I just wanted to open the floor. Questions in general, questions specific to Casey for GMS related topics. We are here to answer any questions. And if not, we can hop off and enjoy this beautiful Thursday. So we'll hang on here for anyone that's got questions, but if you need to go, you need to go, and we will hopefully see you soon.
Thank you.
Everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.
Thanks, Michelle.
Great job. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Casey.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Yay. All right.
Bye.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye, Tim. Thanks.
Oh, bye.